Hello and welcome to our first ever remote lounge. My name's Gavin Clark. I'm the CEO and founder of Remote Solutions. And these remote lounges are designed to shed a little bit more light into the event industry and hear from some of the event professionals. And with that, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Paula Covey onto the screen. And Paula is the Chief Marketing Officer for Allianz Partners Health. And Paula, I'm actually going to hand over to you a little bit just to explain a little bit more about what you do within Allianz and your role.
Hi, Gavin. Yeah, great to be here. Within Allianz Partners Health, we're looking at cross-border health. So this is people who need to go to other countries for private health. It's a global role, it's an international role, and my remit looks after everything from strategy, product, marketing, and also sort of new business solutions. So I'm quite busy.
I was going to say, quite a wide scope there of what you do. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really helpful for us and certainly other industry folk there to hear your input and what you have to say there. So with that, I'm going to go straight into the questions that we have for you. In the news recently, we're hearing, obviously we've heard so much about COVID and the pandemic, and now we're hearing about monkeypox. How is that impacting the Allianz's marketing strategy, and what would be the plan for your kind of near future, maybe a little bit more of the long-term future there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and I think we have lived through and are living through quite extraordinary times. I think at a very basic business level, our business model is around people being sent to other countries to work. And obviously with the pandemic, that was somewhat curtailed. And whilst it was still happening, we've seen quite a static market for some time. We are seeing, though, an increase in more nomadic choices, because the big shift, of course, that the pandemic created is how we all view and see how our working lives now play out. And doing this kind of thing has now become normal. So with the pandemic, I think the really big step change that I really want us to hang on to is how we communicated with customers. So we had to get used to talking to various different audiences when our information was maybe a millisecond more informed than something the customer already knew. So we had to get used to that regular touch-in, regular communication panels, opening it up when we didn't have all the answers to some of our key stakeholders like brokers, and sharing exactly what we knew. So I feel like the really big shift that it created, that is a really positive one, is it reduced the barrier. It reduced that kind of external border that we put around our companies sometimes. And that's the bit that I'm really trying to take forward in everything that we do.
And then kind of just drilling down.
COVID. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And you're right. And I think sometimes we need to be forced into, into a different way of thinking, a more innovative way of thinking. And actually, maybe that's a little bit of a plus side that's come out of the COVID, is the way that it's forced that innovation and the way that we, address some of these issues that we have there. Yeah. And then if we think about particularly around the events and how you meet, not only internally, but how you meet with your external partners, your customers, your clients, your stakeholders there, how has that changed as well? And how do you think that will continue to change?
Yeah, I think there are pluses and minuses. As I've said, I think the initial stages of the pandemic forced us to be braver and move quicker. The acceleration I don't think we'd have seen without something like that. Unfortunately, it did take something like that. The secondary point, and we were working on a really big program at the moment where we've had to pull together various different stakeholders globally on different elements, and that's where I think hybrid is starting to work out. So we've been able to use local teams to do some of the face-to-face. But we've really thought about how we build the story digitally, when the optimum time is for the face-to-face interactions to happen, and then how you supplement the face-to-face and digital elements as you go forward. And that's what's really interesting now. It's not about digital or face-to-face. It's about how do you combine the different elements to achieve what you want to achieve, to make yourself feel closer to the market. And of course, the digital platforms you've got it's not just about taking a face-to-face environment and putting that digitally. It's because it's digital, what can you now do? Well, you can record it, and other people who can't make that slot can now see it. You can forward it on to various different people. You can invite more people. You can have more targeted sessions and break down the subject that you're trying to convey. So yeah, it's really exciting, I think, about how you bring the two together.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And certainly from us as a production company, that's what really excites us. It's not so about the two-dimensional ways. It's a way that we can be a bit more 3D with the way that we're thinking, what are the tools that we can integrate there, and how we can be a bit more creative into the events. And forgive me, I'm just looking down at some of the stats as well. And Event MB's 2021 research said that 71% of event planners said they would continue to employ the digital strategy even when live events return. Do you agree with that? Is that a similar sort of trend that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I highlighted that already, but I think I would just reiterate it, even if I wasn't in a global role, because obviously digital allows you to stretch much, much further without the expense of lots of flights, etc. So even without that parameter, I think we have got used to absorbing and interacting in this digital format. And it is about how far can we take that, and what does that enable us to do, and then how do you optimize the face-to-face. That's the real key challenge. That's what I see going forward.
Yeah, and I think that blend of it, isn't it, is more about that. It's a communications tool, and using all the facets there to communicate your message effectively across all these different sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. And breaking down your segments and your audiences, and then being able to deliver things in a digital format also enables you to test what works and what doesn't. If I go back to when we were at the beginning of the conversation about COVID, I mean, you guys were with us on that journey in helping us come over some of those obstacles and thinking creatively together. But we had to move fast, and some things worked and some things didn't. But you can change it. You haven't got a massive event where you've flown people in from everywhere, and the risk is really high. You can do that test and learn much, much easier in a digital way.
No, absolutely, and I think that's certainly one of the many plus points about doing it in the virtual world. Moving on to my next question, it's really great hearing those insights there, and moving on to my next question, and it's kind of sticking with the news theme again, unfortunately. And at the moment, we're hearing lots about the rise in inflation globally. The cost of living, particularly in the UK, and the big R word, the possible recession that may be looming. How do you think that's going to impact your marketing strategy, and how you're going to go forward with some of the events and the strategy as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's always very concerning, isn't it? I think I tackle the question in a couple of ways. I mean, there's the direct thing from a company, an inside the company out perspective, which is, customers will want to see return on investment. We need to stay close to our customers as well, as they will have some of these challenges. We're in the space of employee benefits, so anything that's happening in that employment market obviously affects our business model. So staying close and working out how we bring those different things together and how we continue to offer value are the obvious elements. One of the key areas that I think the pandemic again kind of accelerated in a positive way, but it is still a big issue for employers to manage now, is around mental health. And it's kind of the byproduct. So whether it's the pandemic and what that's done, but also, quickly coming on the back of that recession and all of the economic pressures and the uncertainty that creates, it's just elongating that whole period of ambiguity that people are living in. So one of the really big demands on us is how we can create, good solutions around mental health. And again, we're looking at what's the combination between physical human beings and digital support tools. So that trend is playing out in things like that as well. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the pressures on our wider, as employers, but also as in looking after clients who've got lots of employees in this situation, mental health is a big focus for us.
And that's really interesting, because you hear in the news a lot of people saying, oh, well, salaries need to increase. It's all about salary, and it seems to me, from what you're saying, it's not necessarily about that salary. It is more about that, how you can support people mentally, how you can support their mental well-being. I think that's a really kind of interesting take on it, or certainly a little bit different to kind of what you hear constantly in the news there.
Yeah, I mean, if people can't afford to put food on the table, it it drops. But I think companies are having to take a bit more of a holistic approach. With the hybrid working, at least you can eliminate things like commuting costs. There are different ways of looking at the problem and not just pumping it all into salary. I mean, salary will need to shift. I'm absolutely sure of that. But companies also can't afford to just necessarily shove all of that cost into their business models as well. So it's trying to take a holistic approach, and that's what we're concentrating on, is what's our role in that and how can we support some of those decisions.
No, I think, and that's really lovely to hear. And then thinking about the actual kind of cost of business, and particularly around events, so do you think with the hybrid model, the virtual events, will you see a decrease in spend, or do you have to be kind of a bit more creative in the way that you spend, particularly with events?
No, I think we will spend the same, if not a bit more. And I wouldn't say it's spending it on events per se. It's more about communication and keeping the dialogue open. So it's a mixture of things. And I know I've said it a couple of times already, but I can't reiterate it enough. The digital solutions help us achieve and help us go so far and broaden some of our reach. And then it's about, okay, now what do we really want to get out of the face-to-face events, and not seeing them as independent of each other, but seeing everything as a build. So we I called it a digital sandwich. So, you make sure that you're really optimizing your face-to-face time, because that is the most expensive element to create. And digital as well. I mean, when we started our journey together in helping us with the various events that we've put together now, it's not necessarily that it's cheap as chips to do digital, because you have to still do it well. And it's getting that balance right. But it is a much broader way of capturing a much bigger audience.
No, absolutely. And I think what we've seen, rather than events being, kind of a one-day event, people arrive and they go again, it's more about a timeline now. And one thing we work quite closely with, and then what we've done a lot with you, is more that not just about the event, it's that pre and post meeting engagement. So people are already engaged before they kind of join the event, whether it be face-to-face or virtual, and continuing that engagement, continue that education, making that content available post event. And do you agree with that? Are you seeing that kind of trend as well as you kind of transition to this much more hybrid model?
Yeah, I think on reflection, it makes you realize how almost mentally lazy we were being with the sort of one event a year type mentality, which was a lot of which was driven by cost, right? And then a huge amount of effort going into the agenda at that point and trying to manage off every different topic, and then coming away exhausted and then starting to get ready for next year. Now it's about a momentum and a dialogue, and how you keep the momentum between events going with a variety of different tools. It's not about one and done. It's about opening the doors and creating more dialogue using a variety of tools.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to squeeze everything in. You don't have to cherry pick the best. It means that you can, stretch out that program a little bit more. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So my next question is something that's a big topic on everybody's agenda, or certainly a lot of organisations' agenda, and that's really about the environmental footprint, people's impact to the environment and their carbon footprint. What's Allianz's strategy in terms of around their global footprint there?
I mean, we have the usual sort of in-house targets on footprint, and there is a cost and an environmental driver which are around travel. But we are at a situation at the moment where people are hungry to get together. You can kind of feel it, and we will still have to do some of those elements. It's just more about how we get the most out of it. In a broader context, obviously, Allianz Partners is part of the Allianz Group, and this sustainability, environmental sustainability, is a really big topic and very close to the heart of our CEO, Oliver Beta. So there is a committee within Allianz. I won't bore you with all the details, but they document by industry segment exactly what our approach will be to investments or taking on risk from different segments, because there are certain companies and certain business models that are contributing to the environmental problems that we have, and some that aren't. So, and we try and balance our protocols using NGOs and various different bodies to help advise us. But it's quite central to the Allianz approach to its business lines.
No, absolutely, and particularly around virtual, that's kind of a huge step in terms of becoming carbon neutral there. And I guess the next step is when we start bringing face to face back, kind of looking at the travel sector as well. What companies are we using to ship our participants around the world? Aeroplanes becoming electrified as well, so that has a huge help. On that, based on that kind of the environmental goal within the organisation, do you think that will reduce the travel and increase that virtual need, or something else there?
I think, if I'm honest, I think it'll oscillate, because I think we'll pull back on it and then we'll realise we've gone too far and that people need some face-to-face time, and then we'll ramp up a little bit. I don't know when we will find the optimum, or whether we just have to live with a fluctuation on travel. In our exec, we recently had our mid-year sort of strategy offsite, and the volume of stuff that we cleared in 2 days, even though we are very used to working digitally, was huge. And we all said, okay, we need to work out a way of doing this, because that was the first time we've all been together in 2 years in the same location. So it's a big topic. I don't think there is a perfect formula at the moment. I think the reality is it'll oscillate. What I am hoping, though, is that we continue to get better about how digital builds towards getting a better optimum out of the face-to-face. So it's, again, like I said, not one being better than the other, but how do you get the most out of your digital interactions, and how do you then really hone your agenda for what needs to be decided face-to-face?
No, absolutely, and certainly we're seeing that across many of our different clients as well. And I think it's about again, we're talking a lot about that hybrid model there. It's about being selective, isn't it? It's about that choice. Do we really need to ship those people there? And maybe the types of events that you're doing. Is it an educational meeting? Well, maybe that digital strategy is much better, all online. And then when we might have that kind of, when you're meeting your exec team, you've said it to us, you got so much more done when you're face to face, and we can't forget that. It's very easy to say, well, we'll just have another virtual meeting and we kind of tick that box. But actually, if we think about the meetings that we might have, we hone it in a little bit, get everybody together in the room and actually really kind of thrash some things out and get some things done. I think that's still hugely valuable within organisations.
Yeah, it's a big time commitment as well, travel. So I think that's the other factor that's not always taken into account. I mean, there's the immediate cost thing, but it eats a huge amount of time. Just thinking about, people, just getting people back to the office, they're moaning about commute times and how much of their precious sort of productivity time that's eating. So no, I think we're still on our way to working out what the optimum is.
No, absolutely. And if we kind of look back to pre-pandemic, none of us would kind of think secondly about 3 days out of the office, a day of travel, day of meeting, and a day to travel back. But nowadays, we're kind of thinking, wow, how can I afford to take that time out of the office?
Yeah, it has changed a lot.
No, that's wonderful, and I know that we've talked a huge amount of hybrid, and I think that's kind of really the strategy that we're all seeing going forward. But what I'd really like to kind of understand really is for you to summarise and your kind of more personal thoughts in how that model looks, how you see that going forward, and kind of what it means to you really.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a couple of things. The first is that I think the digital tools, the digital way of interacting, we've created a much more personable. I know it doesn't sound intuitive because it's digital and maybe that's not as personal, but it is a much more personable way, because I think we're all getting more familiar with doing things like this, having a conversation like this, and knowing that you've got an anonymous audience kind of looking at it. And I think it's forced us to be braver in moving faster and sharing information quicker, and the speed with which it is. So I think for me, it's that digital sandwich, digital tools working along key messages that you want to land or key parts of dialogue that you want to generate in your market, and then what's the right place and timing for the face-to-face event, and who are the key stakeholders that need to be there, and how have you built the momentum towards that event. And that's what I mean by the digital sandwich. It's that if the face-to-face bit is the closer, then how are all the digital elements kind of working in combination, and what are those key elements that you want to land across the year. So we get a lot more strategic, I think, in the way that our communications work.
No, that's really interesting. I think that kind of, also comes back to that sort of timeline approach, really, isn't it? It's not just about that kind of one activity. It's how can we extend that? How can we make it more available? And I also think, and it'd be interesting to see your point, your thoughts on this. It's always been about content is king, and obviously content still plays a big role in that. But do you feel that we need to get more creative in our content? Do we need to use some more mediums in the way that we deliver our message? What would be your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think content is absolutely key, but so is engaging in the conversation. It can't all be spoon feeding out the content. For me, it's about how do you build on the content? How do you generate discussions by getting messages out there through different mediums? 2 years ago, 18 months ago, it would have been unheard of for me to have one person permanently working on video snapshots of key messages to get out in various different mediums. And that's what we now need, is people who are generating that. So when we talk about the mediums and so on, video, seeing real interactions, I think it's the quality of the content, not just the volume, because we all know what it's like with social media and different platforms that we're all on. It gets hard to cut through the noise. So you do need to find ways of creating two-way communication. I wouldn't say we've got that sus by any means, but yeah, short, sharp bits of information and finding out what's landing with people and what's not working and moving on quite quickly seems to be the key.
And that kind of leads on to my sort of question, regarding social media, that plays a big impact in all of our lives now. And I think, we're so used to seeing videos on everything now, and that seems to be quite an certainly important aspect now. Is that's what people are used to, watching a video rather than reading now. Is kind of delivering that information quickly and sharply and kind of getting it into people's minds instantly rather than that kind of read of information.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it also forces the organisation to have to be really simple. So, if you used to be able to indulge in a 30-minute meeting or a 45-minute meeting and all of your effort went into PowerPoint and cramming as many slides as you possibly could onto your little USB stick or whatever you were doing, you're now having to, if you've got, 30 seconds max to get your message across, you've really got to simplify and really hone that message. So I think it's tougher in a lot of ways because you've really got to hone the message. But it's more exciting because you've got different ways that you can play and you can experiment. You haven't invested everything into a sort of regret it if you've got it wrong environment. You can test and learn as you go.
And I also think creating video content is actually more accessible now than what it was before. If I certainly think how it really is there. When I think about the kind of equipment and the services we had to put in place just to create a video, it was really vast. But certainly there's some really great tools out there that make it a bit more accessible. And then just quickly before I move on there, do you think that the kind of generation has kind of helped switch that? Maybe the younger generation, are really social media focused, are really on their phones watching lots of videos. Do you think that's helped shape that a little bit as well?
For sure. I think, of course, that digital savvy generations that are coming through, certainly in my teams and so on, play a part in it. But I don't think it's we are seeing that interaction, that demand for that interaction across all the generations, and that need for information, that need for dialogue. And people have got used to clicking on buttons and getting answers quite quickly. So if you're not a company that's thinking about that, that's going to be a problem for you at some point if it isn't already, because that is how everybody's had to operate, certainly in the last 2 years.
Exactly, it's that kind of appetite that we all have now, isn't it? Just for that instant response, with whether we're searching something or asking a question, we want it there and now. It's been really interesting to hear your insights there. And really my final question, and I think this is the most important question, is personally, what really excites you kind of looking forward with the events industry, within marketing and the comms industry? What's really kind of getting you going with what's coming up?
I think I've probably given it away already a little bit, in terms of it's about how we get that dialogue going with our stakeholders and our customers, really starting to tap in, because the digital tools and the things we've experimented with, and lots of organizations has created more two-way dialogue, has kind of, like I say, brought that boundary between company and customer down, made us more accessible. But also, I think it allows for innovation. We can understand trends, we can get to know information more quickly rather than wait for long periods of time, because we can experiment with the mediums with which we're doing it. And that's really exciting, because the more we understand the key issues for our customers, the better our solutions are going to be. So I think that's what really excites me, is how do we keep that momentum going and that innovation going? The innovation that we had forced upon us by the pandemic. Yeah. How do we keep that going in a more normal environment?
Exactly. We don't really want to get stagnated there, do we? We want to kind of keep driving that forward, and that certainly excites me as well. Is kind of what's around the corner in terms of, and I think that's also puts pressure on us all as well, doesn't it? In terms of how do we innovate? What tools are we looking at, and how are people communicating? Personally, I think it's only going to get easier to communicate. Already, like you say, the mindsets of changing how we can talk now. Personally, I'm seeing more people even just turn on their video camera when I have a Teams meeting now. I don't know about you, but before it was, everybody kind of was behind closed doors. But I think people are starting to see that there is a human now behind that Teams meeting, and people are, seem to be comfortable with putting on their cameras.
Yeah, I think we've still got a way to go in full hybrid working, but I think people are much more used to this whole environment, and the visibility point will become increasingly important.
Absolutely. As technology changes, we all have to embrace it, don't we? Not just at a personal level, at an organisational level as well, to keep driving that forward. So Paula, it's been really wonderful to talk to you, and just looking at through just some of the kind of key take-home messages that we've got, is that digital has increased communication there. Ultimately, it has cut costs in terms of that travel spend. Maybe not as simplified as people may think, but there's certainly been a cost reduction there, and it certainly seems to have reduced the barriers, particularly with organisational events, especially within Allianz. Digital tools have allowed for innovation, which is absolutely key, and that we've all been super excited about. Mental health support and sustainability are top priorities, and I think that goes across the board, not just at organisational levels, and I think that's at personal levels as well. Yeah. And I think there, and what I'm hearing is the key focus should be on the quality of the content and the engagement, not just the volume and the amount of times that you kind of repeat there.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. No, that's lovely. Thank you very much. And during the session today, we have received a number of questions, which has been really great. And between us and Paula, we'll have some input from you with some of our responses to those. So
happy to.
Fantastic. So we will get back to our viewers there in the next couple of days with those responses. For me personally, and from all of us at Remote Solutions, I would like to say thank you so much for joining us today on this first of our remote lounges. So it's been an absolute delight having you, having your insights and hearing all your thoughts on the industry and how you see it going forward in the future. It's been really great to hear. For our other attendees, this session is being recorded, so we do encourage everybody to share it with your colleagues, rewatch it, come back to it. If you get any further questions when you watch it, please do submit it, and we will get back to you. And for both of us, Remote Solutions and Allianz Partners Health, please do look at our social media pages, do like, do follow, do share. It's really great. And in particular, look out for our future lounge session. And so Paula, It's been lovely hearing from Paula, of course. So to all of our audience, thank you so much for watching today, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.